My name is Olivia. I was 16 years old when I first realized that you can live in a house full of people and still feel like a ghost. I grew up as the middle child in a family where love wasn't something you just received, it was something you earned. My older brother, Nathan, was the academic golden child. Perfect grades, debate team captain, scholarship offers rolling in before he even finished junior year. My younger sister, Vanessa, had this effortless charm that made everyone in a room turn toward her. She could walk into a family gathering and own it without even trying. And then there was me. Quiet, observant, consistently somewhere in between. I wasn't failing, I wasn't causing problems, I just wasn't exceptional in any way my family seemed to value. I got decent grades, had a few friends, kept my head down. I existed in that strange middle space where nothing I did was ever quite enough to warrant attention, but nothing I did was ever wrong enough to cause concern. In our house, achievements were currency. Dinner table conversations revolved around Nathan's latest academic award or Vanessa's social triumphs. I learned early that if I wanted to contribute, I needed something worth saying, something impressive, something noteworthy. Most of the time, I didn't. So I stopped trying. Not dramatically, not with rebellion or anger. I just became quieter. I started observing instead of participating. I watched my family operate like a well-oiled machine that had learned to function perfectly well without ever really noticing I was there. No one was cruel, no one was intentionally unkind. That's what made it so hard to name. There were no villains in my story, just a family that had somehow decided, without ever saying it out loud, that I didn't require the same level of attention as everyone else. And for a long time, I believed them. It wasn't one moment, it was 1,000 small ones that accumulated like dust you don't notice until the light hits it just right. Family dinners were the worst. I'd try to join the conversation, start a sentence about something that happened at school, and halfway through, someone would interrupt. Not maliciously, just naturally, as if I hadn't been speaking at all. The conversation would shift to Nathan's college applications or Vanessa's weekend plans, and my half-finished thought would hang in the air for a moment before dissolving completely. No one ever circled back. No one ever said, "Sorry, Olivia, what were you saying?" They just moved on. When I made honor roll, my mother smiled and said, "That's wonderful, sweetie," before immediately asking Nathan about his science fair project. When Vanessa made honor roll 2 years later, we went out to dinner to celebrate. When I needed help with something, a ride somewhere, advice on a decision, someone to talk to, I was told to figure it out, be independent, solve it myself. When my siblings needed the same things, the family mobilized. I started keeping a mental tally without meaning to. How many times my achievements were acknowledged with polite nods versus genuine celebration. How many times I was told I was so mature or so self-sufficient when what I really was alone. I began to shrink, not physically, but in every other way. I stopped raising my hand at the dinner table, stopped sharing news unless directly asked, stopped expecting anyone to remember details about my life because they never did. I convinced myself it was easier this way, less disappointing. No one was cruel. No one sat me down and told me I didn't matter. They didn't have to. Their indifference spoke louder than words ever could. And the worst part, they didn't even notice. My presence or absence made no measurable difference to the rhythm of our household. I was there, but I wasn't seen. And slowly, I started to believe that maybe I wasn't worth seeing. I spent months trying to figure out what was wrong with me. Maybe I wasn't interesting enough. Maybe I didn't have the spark that made people lean in and listen. Nathan had intelligence. Vanessa had charisma. What did I have? I'd lie awake at night running through possibilities, dissecting my personality like a failed experiment, trying to identify the missing ingredient that would make my family actually see me. I tried different approaches. I became helpful, anticipating what people needed before they asked, organizing things, remembering everyone's schedules. I thought maybe if I made myself useful, I'd become necessary. That didn't work. They accepted the help without acknowledgement, like I was part of the furniture that happened to be functional. So I tried being quieter, less demanding. Maybe I'd been asking for too much attention. Maybe the problem was that I expected anything at all. I made myself smaller, took up less space, needed less. That didn't work either. The less I asked for, the less I received, until I was barely a presence in my own family. I tried being more accommodating, agreeing with everything, supporting everyone else's goals and dreams. I became the person who never complained, never caused problems, never rocked the boat. And you know what happened? Nothing. Absolutely nothing changed. Eventually, I stopped trying to decode it. I just accepted it as fact. This was who I was in this family, the one who existed on the periphery, always there, never central, present but not participant. It wasn't depression. I wasn't sad all the time. It wasn't rage. I wasn't angry at them. It was something quieter and more permanent. Resignation, maybe. A kind of emotional detachment that felt less like giving up and more like adapting to reality. I became self-sufficient by necessity. When I had problems, I solved them alone. When I needed advice, I figured it out myself. When I wanted to share something exciting, I learned to keep it inside or share it with people outside my family who actually seemed interested. I built an entire inner world my family knew nothing about. Thoughts, dreams, fears, friendships, interests, all of it happening in spaces they never thought to ask about. I existed in two versions, the quiet, unremarkable daughter they saw at dinner, and the actual person I was becoming in all the moments they weren't paying attention. And for a while, that felt like enough, until it didn't. The moment everything crystallized happened on a completely ordinary Tuesday in March. My grandmother had fallen ill, and the family was scrambling. Someone needed to coordinate doctor visits, manage medications, organize a rotating schedule so she wouldn't be alone. Everyone was worried, everyone was upset, but no one was actually doing anything. So I did it. I spent 2 weeks managing everything. I created spreadsheets. I called her doctors and insurance companies. I rearranged my own schedule to cover gaps no one else could fill. I made sure she had groceries, that her prescriptions were refilled, that someone was checking on her daily. I did it quietly, efficiently, the way I'd learned to do everything, without asking for help, without making it anyone else's problem. When my grandmother recovered enough to return to her normal routine, my family gathered for dinner to celebrate. My father raised his glass and thanked Nathan for stepping up during a difficult time. Nathan, who had visited twice and made exactly 3 phone calls. My mother nodded, smiling. "We're so lucky to have such a responsible son." Vanessa chimed in about how stressful it had all been for everyone. I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, and felt something inside me go completely still. No one corrected the narrative. No one said, "Actually, Olivia handled most of this." No one even glanced my way. It wasn't that they were deliberately stealing credit, they genuinely didn't know. They hadn't been paying attention. In their version of events, I simply hadn't been there. And that's when I saw it, really saw it. I'd been performing for an audience that wasn't watching. I'd been trying to earn love from people who had already decided, unconsciously, that I wasn't the child who required their attention. Nothing I did would change that, because they weren't looking for evidence. They'd already drawn their conclusions. It wasn't anger that I felt. It was something colder, clearer, a kind of calm certainty. I wasn't invisible because I was deficient. I was invisible because they had chosen not to see me, and I had spent years trying to fix a problem that was never mine to solve. I set my fork down carefully. I didn't argue. I didn't correct anyone. I just sat there, quiet as always, and made a decision I didn't yet have words for. I was done performing. I was done trying to be seen by people who had taught themselves not to look. I didn't announce my decision. There was no confrontation, no dramatic declaration. I just quietly stopped participating in the parts of family life that had never included me anyway. I stopped seeking approval for things that mattered to me, stopped sharing updates about school, friends, or anything happening in my world. When my mother asked how my day was, I'd say fine and nothing more. When my father wondered if I had any plans for the weekend, I'd give vague, pleasant answers that revealed nothing. I stopped being the family mediator. When Nathan and Vanessa argued, I didn't step in to smooth things over. When my parents needed someone to run an errand or handle some small task, I suddenly had homework, plans, reasons I couldn't help. Not rudely, just unavailable. I stopped attending family dinners whenever I had even a semi-legitimate excuse. Study group, library, friend's house. I became very good at being elsewhere. The strangest part? No one noticed. Life continued exactly as it had before. Conversations at the dinner table flowed the same way. Family routines remained unchanged. My absence created no gap because I had never been filling a space that anyone consciously valued. I had been background noise, and background noise doesn't leave an echo when it stops. It confirmed everything. But while my presence in the family shrank, my actual life expanded in ways they knew nothing about. I built friendships with people who asked questions and waited for answers. I joined activities I'd been interested in for years, but never mentioned because no one had ever asked what I cared about. I started writing, filling notebooks with thoughts and observations I'd stopped trying to share at home. I made plans, real ones, for after high school, for college, for a future that existed entirely outside the narrow framework my family had built around me. I became two people: the polite, quiet daughter who appeared at family functions with a pleasant smile and nothing to say, and the actual version of myself that existed everywhere else. The version who had opinions, passions, a personality. The version who laughed loudly with friends, who stayed up late debating ideas that mattered, who felt seen and valued and genuinely known. My family interacted with the shell. The real me lived in spaces they never thought to look. And the most unsettling part wasn't that they didn't notice my withdrawal. It was how easy it was, how little effort it took to become a stranger in my own home. I had thought disconnecting would be painful, that it would require some kind of struggle, but it didn't. It was the most natural thing in the world, like stepping out of a room no one realized I'd been standing in. The cracks started appearing about 3 months after I stopped trying. Small things at first. My mother stood in the kitchen one evening, staring at the calendar with visible confusion. "Why didn't anyone remind me about Nathan's college interview?" she asked no one in particular. Because I had always been the one who tracked those things, who kept mental notes of everyone's schedules, who sent gentle reminders before important dates. But I didn't say that. I just looked up from my homework, shrugged, and went back to reading. My father started complaining that the house felt tense lately, though he couldn't articulate why. There was a low-level friction he couldn't identify. What he didn't realize was that I had been the one smoothing over conflicts before they escalated, redirecting conversations when they got heated, quietly diffusing tension before anyone else even registered it was there. Vanessa got into an argument with a friend and came home upset, expecting what? Sympathy? Advice? Someone to talk to? She wandered into the living room where I was sitting, clearly wanting to vent. I glanced up, said, "That sounds difficult," and returned my attention to my phone. She stood there for a moment, confused by my lack of engagement, then walked away. Nathan forgot to submit an important form for a scholarship because no one had reminded him to check his email. He was furious, stressed, scrambling to fix it. In the past, I would have caught it. I would have noticed and said something. This time, I hadn't even known it existed. But here's the thing, they didn't connect this to me. They just felt vaguely frustrated, like something in the household machinery had stopped working smoothly, but they couldn't identify which part. It didn't occur to them that I had been that part. Meanwhile, my life outside that house was flourishing in ways they couldn't see. I had joined the school's literary magazine and discovered I was actually good at editing, at shaping other people's words into something stronger. The advisor told me I had a real eye for it. I started staying after school for layout meetings, spending weekends at a local cafe with the other editors, people who knew my opinions on everything from poetry to politics. I made a friend named Maya who listened when I talked, actually listened, asked follow-up questions, remembered details from previous conversations, cared about the things I cared about. We'd spend hours discussing books, art, the future. She knew more about my real thoughts than my family had learned in 16 years. I auditioned for a role in the spring play and got it. A small part, but mine. I learned my lines, attended rehearsals, felt the thrill of becoming someone else under stage lights. On opening night, I didn't invite my family. I told them it was a minor production, not worth their time. They didn't push. The contrast was stark. At home, I was a fading outline. Everywhere else, I was becoming solid, real, visible. I wasn't punishing them. I wasn't withholding myself out of spite. I had simply redirected my energy toward people and spaces that actually valued it. Their opinion of me had stopped mattering because I'd found people whose opinions did. I was living proof that you don't need your family's validation to build a life worth living. They just didn't know it yet. The shift became impossible to ignore when Nathan's college plans started falling apart. He'd been accepted to his top choice, but financial aid fell through at the last minute. Suddenly, there were forms to contest, appeals to write, alternative scholarships to research, the kind of detailed, time-sensitive coordination that required someone to manage multiple moving parts simultaneously. My mother was overwhelmed. My father was traveling for work. Vanessa was too young to help with something this complex. They turned to me. Not directly at first. My mother mentioned it at dinner, her voice strained with stress, clearly expecting me to offer solutions like I always had. I nodded sympathetically and said, "That sounds really stressful. I hope it works out." Then I passed the potatoes. My mother blinked, visibly surprised. She waited, as if I might follow up with a plan, a suggestion, an offer to help research options. When I didn't, she turned back to Nathan, flustered. A few days later, my father actually asked me directly if I could look into some scholarship databases, make a spreadsheet of options, help organize the appeal letters. His tone carried that familiar assumption, of course I would do this, because this is what I did. "I have a really busy week," I said calmly, "but I'm sure Nathan can handle the research. He's smart enough to figure it out." My father frowned. "Olivia, this is important. Your brother needs support right now." "I understand. I'm just not available to take that on." The confusion on his face was almost comical. Not available? Since when was I not available? Over the next week, their frustration grew. Why wasn't I helping? Why was I being so distant? My mother actually used the word cold in a conversation with my father that I overheard from the hallway. "She's being so cold about this whole thing. It's not her." Except it was exactly me, the me they'd created by years of benign neglect, the me who had learned that my effort went unnoticed and my presence was optional. I hadn't changed. I had simply stopped compensating for their lack of attention. Nathan was stressed, snapping at everyone. Vanessa complained that the house felt weird. My parents seemed perpetually confused, like they'd lost something but couldn't remember what. They kept waiting for me to step in, to be the person who quietly fixed things, and when I didn't, they framed it as my failure, my sudden change in behavior, my inexplicable coldness. They still didn't understand. I hadn't become someone new. They were just finally noticing that I existed as a separate person, with my own boundaries, my own limits, my own life. And that person was no longer interested in performing emotional labor for people who never acknowledged she was performing it in the first place. I remained polite, pleasant even, but the depth was gone. And that absence, apparently, was louder than my presence had ever been. My mother cornered me in the kitchen on a Saturday afternoon. "We need to talk about what's been going on with you," she said, her arms crossed, her tone hovering between concern and accusation. I looked up from the sandwich I was making. Okay. You've been distant lately, pulling away from the family. My father and I have noticed. And honestly, Olivia, it's hurtful. We're all going through a stressful time with Nathan's situation, and instead of coming together, she gestured vaguely. I don't even know what you're doing. I set down the knife carefully. I'm living my life.
That's not what I mean. You know what I mean. You've changed. I haven't changed, I said quietly. You're just noticing me for the first time. Her face shifted, confusion, then defensiveness. That's not fair. We've always noticed you. We love you. You're our daughter. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. When was the last time you asked me about my life? We ask you all the time how school is. That's not what I asked. I kept my tone even. When was the last time you asked what I care about, what I'm interested in, what my plans are? Silence. What activities am I involved in right now? I continued. Who are my friends? What do I do when I'm not home? My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. She genuinely didn't know. I'm not trying to be cruel, I said, but I spent years trying to be seen in this family, and it didn't work. So I stopped trying. That's not me pulling away. That's me accepting reality. We do see you, she protested, but her voice wavered. You've always been so independent, so self-sufficient. You never seemed to need. I was 16, I interrupted gently. Everyone needs to be seen. I just learned not to expect it from you. She looked stricken. Olivia, that's not. We didn't mean. I know you didn't mean to, I said. That's what makes it so hard to explain. There's no villain here. You're not bad people. You just never looked. And I'm tired of trying to make you. I picked up my sandwich and walked past her. She didn't follow. Behind me, the kitchen was completely silent. After that conversation, things shifted in a way that felt more uncomfortable than cathartic. My family started paying attention, not naturally, performatively, like they'd suddenly remembered I existed and were trying to compensate. My father asked about school with an intensity that felt forced. My mother noticed the literary magazine I'd left on the counter and flipped through it, surprised to see my name listed as an editor. I didn't know you were involved in this, she said, and I just nodded. Nathan, dealing with his own stress, barely engaged, but Vanessa started lingering in doorways, trying to strike up conversations about nothing in particular, as if proximity alone could rebuild something that had never been built in the first place. They saw my independence now, the life I'd constructed entirely outside their awareness, and I think it made them uncomfortable. Not because they were happy for me, but because it reminded them of what they'd missed. My mother found the acceptance letter for a summer writing program I'd applied to on my own, a competitive program I hadn't mentioned, because I'd learned years ago that my achievements were only worth celebrating if they fit a narrative they already valued. She held the letter like evidence of something, though I wasn't sure what. This is amazing, Olivia. Why didn't you tell us? I didn't think you'd be interested, I said simply. The hurt on her face was real. So was my indifference to it. Some of their reactions felt like guilt. Some felt like defensiveness masquerading as concern. My father tried to have a heart-to-heart, where he explained that they'd always loved me, always been proud, that maybe they hadn't shown it the right way, but their intentions were good. I listened politely. I didn't argue. I just didn't particularly care anymore. Their attempts at reconnection felt hollow because they were motivated by their own discomfort, not genuine interest in who I actually was. They wanted to repair the image of themselves as good parents, not build a real relationship with me. I wasn't angry. That would have required energy I no longer wanted to spend on them. I was just done.
I answered their questions with surface-level pleasantness. I showed up for family dinners when convenient. I didn't fight. I didn't punish. I simply maintained the boundaries I'd built, and those boundaries felt less like cruelty and more like the most basic form of self-preservation. They wanted me back in the role I'd played before, the invisible helper, the accommodating daughter. But that person didn't exist anymore, and I had no interest in resurrecting her. Looking back now, I can say with certainty that I don't hate my family. I don't resent them the way I thought I might. I don't spend energy wishing things had been different or fantasizing about some dramatic reckoning where they finally understand everything they missed. That kind of anger requires investment, and I'm no longer invested. Our relationship is cordial. We exchange pleasantries at holidays. I answer questions about college and career plans with the same polite distance I've maintained for years. They've stopped trying so hard to reconnect, which is almost a relief. The performative interest has faded into acceptance of this new normal, a family that exists in proximity but not intimacy. The irony isn't lost on me. Now they want to know me. Now they notice when I'm quiet at dinner, when I leave early, when I keep my life private. They're curious about the person I've become in all the spaces they weren't looking. But I'm not interested in performing that role anymore. I've built a life where I'm seen, where people know my thoughts, my fears, my dreams, where my presence matters and my absence is felt. I have friendships that run deep, mentors who've invested in my growth, spaces where I don't have to fight to be heard, just not with them. And I found peace in that. Not the peace of reconciliation or mutual understanding, but the quieter peace of no longer needing their validation to know my own worth. They taught me, unintentionally, that you can be related to people and still be strangers. That love, when it's conditional and inconsistent, stops feeling like love at all. So I stopped waiting for them to see me. I stopped performing for an audience that had never bought tickets to the show. I found my people, built my world, became someone I'm proud of. They just don't know her. And maybe that's the gentlest form of closure there is. Not hatred, not forgiveness, just the calm acknowledgement that some distances are too far to cross. And that's okay. I'm okay.